Hello everyone, it's Greg from Edinburgh and Linlithgow Renaissance Fencing Academy here. Today's video is a little bit of a cultural one because we are going to talk about William Shakespeare and his connection with fencing. And specifically, later in the video, I'm going to analyse some elements of his most famous play, Romeo and Juliet, in a bit more detail. But first, a quick introduction. So Shakespeare was active in London in the late 16th and early 17th century. This was a time when fencing was pretty common, both as a pastime, but very much as a practical thing, because sword-based violence on the streets of Western European cities was rife at the time. So Shakespeare, the actors he employed, and many members of his audience would have had at least a passing familiarity with what swordplay, with what fencing looked like and how it worked. And so to give his plays more authenticity, Shakespeare would have included, to some extent anyway, realistic portrayals of fencing, albeit adapted for the stage, of course. So there are a number of Shakespeare's plays which have scenes of swordplay, or at least allusions to swordplay within them. Romeo and Juliet is probably the one that has the most extensive elements of this. So we're going to dive into that today. I'll highlight a few interesting passages and try to explain what it is that they actually mean or represent. All right, let's get started. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is from right at the start of Romeo and Juliet, Act 1, Scene 1. So I'm going to read out just a very short extract and then we'll talk about it. So Act 1, Scene 1, Verona, a public place. Enter Samson and Gregory of the House of Capulet with swords and bucklers on. All right. So these guys are servants or retainers of the House of Capulet, so they're commoners in the employ of that house going about their business, and are carrying swords and bucklers. This was a pretty typical weapon combination for civilian use, civilian self-defense and brawling, as we shall see, in the medieval and early Renaissance period. So you find it as the primary weapon in early 16th century treatises in Italy, such as those of Marozzo and Manciolino. But within England itself, it was considered to be a traditional form of fencing. So George Silver, for example, describes it in basically those terms. So essentially these servants are armed in a, let's say, old school way for the period when the play is set. Let's carry on with Act 1. So a little bit further into the play, these two, Gregory and Samson, Capulet retainers, are walking down the street and they see two servants, Abraham and Balthazar, who are from the rival house of Montague, which is Romeo's house. Okay, so Gregory is speaking and he says to his friend, "Draw thy tool, here comes two of the house of Montagues. Enter two other servants, Abraham and Balthazar." And then Samson says, "My naked weapon is out. Quarrel, I will back thee." And then Gregory and Samson go on to have a conversation about how they can start a quarrel with these other servants who they're looking to rough up a bit. Okay, so Samson says, "Let us take the law of our side. Let them begin." Gregory, "I will frown as I pass by and let them take it as they list." Samson, "Nay, as they dare. I will bite my thumb at them, which is disgrace to them if they bear it." Okay, so he does this, and Abraham, the rival servant, sees it, says, "Do you bite your thumb at us, sir?" Samson, "I do bite my thumb, sir." Abraham, "Do you bite your thumb at us, sir?" Samson, as an aside to his friend Gregory, "Is the law of our side if I say aye?" And Gregory, in an aside back to Samson, "No." Samson, No, sir, I do not bite my thumb at you, sir, but I bite my thumb, sir. Gregory, do you quarrel, sir? Abraham, quarrel, sir? No, sir. Samson, but if you do, sir, I am for you. I serve as good a man as you. Abraham, no better. Samson, well, sir. And it carries on like this for a while until eventually a brawl begins. So what we can see here is an allusion to popular ideas about the dueling code, which is kind of intermixed with ideas of legitimate self-defense. So basically, you're allowed to defend yourself against serious insults and against assaults, so against other people starting trouble with you. So defense was legitimate and offense was not. So essentially, these two characters are trying to manipulate the other two into starting a fight, so that it looks okay from their point of view in the eyes of the law, and that they can defend themselves against this. And there were all kinds of different treatises and pamphlets about dueling codes, honour codes, and the law around defence at the time. So it was a very complicated issue which these servants are trying to navigate their way through. Let's carry on. So there's a big fight between the servants of the rival houses until eventually enter an officer and 3 or 4 citizens with clubs or partisans. Officer, clubs, bills and partisans, strike, beat them down. Okay, so the law has arrived, the city guards, the officer with the militia, with the watch. What's interesting here is that the play tells us what equipment, what weapons they were using. So clubs or cudgels, and then pole arms, partisans and bills. So presumably clubs to subdue people who are being a little bit uppity, and then pole arms for when things got more serious. And further on in the same page, eventually, as the quarrel escalates, the prince of the city, Prince Aeschylus, arrives with his retinue to put an end to everything. And in the midst of his speech, he says, throw your mistempered weapons to the ground and hear the sentence of your moved prince. 3 civil brawls, bred of an airy word by thee, old Capulet, and Montague, have thrice disturbed the quiet of our streets, and made Verona's ancient citizens cast by their grave beseeming ornaments, to wield old partisans in hands as old, cankered with peace to part your cankered hate. So, once again, an allusion to a partisan being carried by people in the service of the law. So guards, militia, watchmen, officers, things like that. So that should immediately make us think of some of these treatises, especially the Italian ones that covered pole arms alongside swordplay. This is why. Okay, so we're going to jump forward a little bit now to later on in the play. Alright, so we're now up to Act 2, Scene 4, and Romeo's 2 friends, Benvolio and Mercutio, are talking together about the situation between the Capulets and the Montagues. And these guys are on the Montague side, they're members of the household of that clan. And the conversation turns away from their friend Romeo and towards Tybalt, who is the nephew of Lady Capulet. So he's kind of the leader of the young toughs of the Capulet house. And Mercutio, who is, let's say, the lead sword on the Montague side, is starting to talk about Tybalt. So he says to his friend, he's talking about Romeo, and is he, Romeo, a man to encounter Tybalt? Benvolio replies, why, what is Tybalt? And Mercutio goes on to explain, more than Prince of Cats. Oh, he's the courageous captain of compliments. He fights as you sing prick song. keeps time, distance, and proportion. He rests his minim rests, 1, 2, and the third in your bosom, the very butcher of a silk button, a duellist, a gentleman of the very first house, of the first and second cause. Ah, the immortal passado, the punto reverso, the hey. Carries on. So, Mercutio is acknowledging that Tybalt is a famous swordsman, but is also kind of mocking him a little bit for being a champion of the modern ideas of fencing and dueling, which had become prominent in Italy from the mid-16th century onwards, and by the time Shakespeare was writing, had been imported into England and other parts of Northern Europe too. So he's basically saying that Tybalt is obsessed with the new idea of manners and looking for an excuse to have a fight with people, and that he's learned fencing in this scientific or at least pseudo-scientific way of using these intellectual concepts like timing and measure, and using some of the technical terminology here from Italian fencing. The punto reverso and the passato are both specific types of attack. And he also makes this really strange allusion to being the very butcher of a silk button and thrusting somebody through the button, through the chest with the third hit. And now this is a historical reference to a real-life Italian fencing master called Rocco Bonetti, who ran a school in London. Bonetti was apparently quite an arrogant man, a proud man, and he boasted that he could hit any button that you cared to name on somebody's doublet with one of his precise thrusts. So really Shakespeare here, very, very aware of the changes that were going on within the sphere of fencing in his day. All right, for the next part, we're going to go to Act 3. So at the start of Act 3, so it's in a public place in Verona once again, and Mercutio and Benvolio are talking once more. And Benvolio is saying to his friend, "I pray thee, good Mercutio, let's retire. The day is hot, the Capulets abroad, and if we meet, we shall not scape a brawl. For now, these hot days is the mad blood stirring." Mercutio replies, "Thou art like one of these fellows that, when he enters the confines of a tavern, claps me his sword upon the table and says, 'God send me no need of thee,' and by the operation of the second cup draws him on the drawer, when, indeed, there is no need." All right, so this immediately gives us a very tangible sense of what Renaissance culture was like for young men about town, as it were. So these guys were swaggering about with swords, and often looking for trouble, even if they believed that they were not troublemakers themselves. As soon as the wine started flowing, it was all too easy for petty disagreements to turn into violent, possibly fatal quarrels, brawls, duels. And indeed, that is exactly what happens in the scene, for before too long Tybalt appears. He's looking for Romeo because he wants to pick a fight with him, but in fact ends up in a fight with Mercutio instead. So let's pick up the action. Let me just find my place here. Yeah, so Tybalt sees Romeo approaching, tries to pick a fight with him. Romeo, who at this point is in love with Juliet, one of the Capulets, says, "I do protest, I never injured thee, but love thee better than thou canst devise, till thou shalt know the reason of my love, and so, good Capulet, which name I tender as dearly as mine own, be satisfied. So it's very much being placatory here. He has no wish to fight at this point. But his hot-headed friend Mercutio butts in and says, "O calm, dishonourable, vile submission, alla stoccata carries it away. Tybalt, you rat-catcher, will you walk?" Tybalt, "What wouldst thou have with me?" Mercutio, "Good king of cats, nothing but one of your 9 lives, that I mean to make bold withal, and, as you shall use me hereafter, dry beat the rest of the 8. Will you pluck your sword out of his pilcher by ears? Make haste, lest mine be about your ears, ere it be out." "I am for you," says Tybalt, draws his rapier. Romeo, "Gentle Mercutio, put thy rapier up." Mercutio, "Come, sir, you're passato," and they fight. Okay, so we can see the goading of the young men into a fight. Once again, allusions to Tybalt's Italianate fencing training in the background there. Romeo is very much trying to calm things down, so we'll continue with the action. Romeo says, "Draw, Benvolio, beat down their weapons. Gentlemen, for shame, forbear this outrage. Tybalt, Mercutio, the prince expressly hath forbid this bandying in Verona streets. Hold, Tybalt, good Mercutio." So he gets in between them, tries to calm the fight down, but Tybalt, under Romeo's arm, thrusts Mercutio in and then flies away with his friends. And Mercutio, "I am hurt, a plague of both your houses. I am sped. Is he gone and hath nothing?" Benvolio, "What, art thou hurt?" Mercutio, Aye, a scratch. Marry, 'tis enough. Where's my page? Go, villain, fetch the surgeon." The page runs off to get a doctor. Romeo, "Courage, man, the hurt cannot be much." Mercutio, "No, 'tis not so deep as a well, nor so wide as a church door, but 'tis enough. 'Twill serve. Ask for me tomorrow, and you shall find me a grave man. I am peppered, I warrant, for this world. A plague of both your houses. Zounds, a dog, a rat, a mouse, a cat, to scratch a man to death. A braggart, a rogue, a villain that fights by the book of arithmetic. Why the devil came you between us? I was hurt under your arm." Okay, once again a reference to Tybalt's fencing training in the Italianate style. Italian treatises and Spanish treatises often made reference to geometry and mathematical elements in their theory, so hence he fights by the book of arithmetic. Also here we can see the reference to the deadliness of the thrust. So Mercutio clearly saying the wound looks like nothing, it's really small, but it's enough to be fatal, as in fact proves to be the case, as he dies quite promptly. Okay, so we'll move on quickly here. So Romeo, in revenge for the slaying of his friend, goes and picks a fight with Tybalt and promptly kills him, and then runs away before the law can catch up with him, leaving his friend Benvolio to try to explain to the prince and the officers of the law what has happened. So Benvolio is giving a summary of everything that led up to the fatal fight. And then he comes to the part where he summarizes what he saw of the original fight between Tybalt and Mercutio. And he says, "Of Tybalt, deaf to peace, but that he tilts with piercing steel at bold Mercutio's breast, who, all as hot, turns deadly point to point, and, with a martial scorn, with one hand beats cold death aside, and with the other sends it back to Tybalt, whose dexterity retorts it." And we'll finish there. So that's quite a nice summary of the duel between Mercutio and Tybalt. So engagement, threats with the point, using the offhand to parry somebody's thrust and then return a thrust of their own, using dexterity to get out of the road, so that's probably a slip, avoiding that thrust. So very much allusions to technical fencing happening here. And that is where I'm going to leave it for today. There's a lot of good stuff to be found in Shakespeare, and in fact there's even a little bit more to be found in Romeo and Juliet, but the video's gone on long enough. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you get that sense that the fencing in Shakespeare's plays, particularly Romeo and Juliet, is good stuff. It's drawing on proper fencing terminology and theory to present sword combat in a pretty much realistic way. All right, so I'll leave it there. Take care, everyone. I'll be back again soon with another video. Bye for now.